Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Well, welcome everybody. We'll call this informational meeting for Tuesday, June 11th to order. First on the agenda, we have committee reports. I did hear from Councilor Starr. He's running a little bit late, so we might get that later. If not, he did inform me that it's the director's report from the Siouxland Heritage Museum is online, so you can look at it on there as well. So for now, we'll put that on hold and move to City Council open discussion. Anybody has any? Councilor Staley?
Well, first of all, Mr. Chair, I congratulate you. I thought something on the artist business page and been promoted. Something going on with real estate.
And as many of my friends have said, it must be a slow news day. But thank you.
Hello? Hello? Is that one on? Can you hear that?
Yep.
I'll just use Janet's then. We got 2 for 1. Just a minute. Now, oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So back to my first thing I said is congratulations to our council chair, Mr. Selberg, for being recognized. Is it a new job, Marshall? Or a new job? Good. So bravo on that in the real estate world. People can read about that in the Sioux Falls Business Journal if they're interested. Second thing I was going to say is that thanks to the generosity of this group of colleagues, I was able to participate in 2 wonderful things last week. The first of them was the Festival of Cultures. It happened down at Falls Park on Saturday. And the council, we agreed to fund a booth for $30 for this. I spent about 6 hours down there, and then Councilor Starr came down and spent an hour or so greeting people. And I talked with lots of people, asked them, I stepped out, introduced myself, asked them what their concerns were, any comments about the city, and 90% of the time, the comment I heard in June was potholes. I was just really kind of blown away. Over and over again, people said potholes was their concern. So hopefully we're going to continue to spend a big chunk of that second penny on potholes. The second thing I wanted to talk about, and we'll talk about this more tonight, is the council generously moved to defer the street situation last Tuesday up on North Dakota Street. And I wanted to have a chance to look that situation over. And I was hoping, if any other colleagues wanted to go up and look it over, it would be a great provision. Not, Jim, nothing now. So anyway, met up there. I'll talk about this more tonight, but I tell you what, it was a fabulous experience. And it was a win-win thing for the business owners. The Lloyd Company was very accommodating, and our city staff was, again, really bent over backwards. So we'll talk about some of those things that came about tonight when we have that coming forward. And then lastly, I want to put out a little shout out to Jeff Eckhoff, the new planning director. I've had 2 meetings with him with business owners in the last week. And, I'm sitting in there with other city staff and Jeff, and the caring, the compassion, and the common sense coming out of that man is covering the whole room. And I'm seeing citizens who are business owners feeling like they're being listened to. I see city staff feeling empowered to show compassion and to take the rules of the road and maybe use them in a way that's going to help the citizens. Because sometimes there's more than one way of looking at something. So I left the mayor a message today and told him, I said, wow, you hit a home run with Jeff Eckhoff. So that's all I have to say for now.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Kiley.
Thank you very much. Over the weekend, it was my pleasure to welcome two groups to the city. The 100th anniversary of the State American Legion met. It was their 101st convention. And also the American Legion Auxiliary had their 99th convention. Governor Noem did presentations as well at both of them, and during the second one, she might have mentioned it during both, but I had to leave one early. Anyway, she did state that they expect to break ground this fall on the State Veterans Cemetery. So that's good news to hear that. So that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. That's everybody? Okay, thanks. We'll move on to the first item here for presentations. The Assistant Director of Public Health, Alicia Kalura, Sioux Falls Family Daycare Registration. Welcome.
Good afternoon, City Council. My name is Alicia Kalura, Assistant Director of the Public Health Department. I was requested to come to Council and provide a general overview of our in-home family daycare program, which I'm pleased to do for you today. I also want to thank some people in the audience for attending with me. Luann Ford, Public Health Manager, is here, who oversees our daycare program, as well as a bevy of environmental health programs. We also have Matt Tobias, representing zoning, and also sometimes a discussion on daycare can include the state, so I'm very grateful that Shannon Turkart is here as a state licensing specialist, should the discussion go in that direction. To give you just a brief history, there's been some skeleton ordinance around family daycare for some time, but I think it was in the early 2000s where a lot of the meat was put on the bones. And I think the reason at that time was the City Council was really wanting to set a minimum standard around the safety of children in our community. The state has a very robust licensing and registration program. However, in the area of in-home daycare, it is a voluntary program. And so at that time, I think the City Council wanted to make sure that within Sioux Falls, we had regulated daycares so that we could protect the safety and well-being of children in in-home daycare. We've had some incremental changes to our ordinance. In 2010, we added daycare inspections, and then in 2012, we added language that required providers to do more self-disclosure of changes or incidences in the home, that all parts of the daycare home are open to inspection, including by parents, and then liability insurance. So that was the last time we had a real change to the ordinance. So that we all are clear on the definitions and what Sioux Falls Health Department regulates, we do regulate in-home daycare, daycares with no more than 12 children. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. This is provided just like it sounds in a home for compensation, no more than 12 children. And I point this out because the health department does not regulate daycare facilities, which can also be part of this conversation. In 2018, we had 262 registered daycares in the Sioux Falls city limits. So Section 92 of the city ordinance has all of the fine details about what is required and what we base our program on, but these are some of the major components. First and foremost, we certainly require background checks, and that includes a check of the Central Registry for Abuse and Neglect, the Sex Offender Registry, criminal background checks, and that's for providers, helpers, or anyone who frequents the home, family members over 15 years of age. We do require minimum education for the providers. They must have infant and child CPR as well as first aid. Liability coverage is required up to or a minimum of $300,000. A master list is required, so a provider needs to have on hand at all times a list of all of their children, the ages, and parent contact information. This is in case there's an emergency or if there was enforcement action at a daycare. And then our fee structure. So knowing that some of our providers may be state and city registered, we wanted to recognize that and also encourage it. So our state registered providers pay $25 a year, while our non-state registered providers pay $125 a year. As I mentioned, in 2010, we began an inspection program. The inspection program includes new facilities. Our inspectors will go in and do a pre-opening inspection as well as a post-opening inspection. We also do an inspection for all of our complaints. So any parent or someone in a neighborhood who may be concerned about an unregistered provider, whatever complaints that we receive, we will respond with an inspection if it is in fact a daycare home. We also do risk-based inspections. So from time to time, there may be a complaint that's substantiated, or we may issue a citation. Another risk-based inspection would be for daycares that have more than one complaint in a year. So we will follow up with an inspection as well as 2 additional inspections in a 3-month period of time. And then lastly, we really appreciate and rely on parents to help be our eyes and ears. Parents are in daycare homes mornings and evenings and up to several times a week. So in 2012, one of the enhancements to our ordinance was to really empower parents to have access to daycare homes for inspections the same way our health inspectors or law enforcement officials would. We do, at times, do enforcement activities. We always try to lead with education, and the number of enforcement activities is very low compared to the number of daycare homes we have. You'll remember in 2016 or 2018, we had 262 providers, and in that year we did 6 citations, 4 suspensions, and 1 revocation. So the number of daycare providers that have enforcement action is very low. We do cooperate with law enforcement and also the state. We have a MOU in place with the Department of Social Services that allows us to work together and share information to protect children. You'll mainly see us rely on citations and suspensions when we have infractions of the ordinance that are some of the more high risk. So for instance, if we find a daycare home that perhaps they haven't been completely truthful with who resides in that home, and we know there's people in that home around children who haven't had those screenings that I talked about, that would be an instance that we would want to address right away. Other high-risk areas are if there are more than 12 children in care, or if someone is outside of the ratios that are required for infants. We do try to be resource-rich. For our providers, we have a centralized place on our website where they can access all of the information about our program as well as the materials they need for registration. We assign each one of our daycare providers an inspector, so they have one point of contact for all of their questions and concerns. And then the education that I spoke about earlier, the minimum required first aid and CPR, those are supported with health department dollars as well as a quarterly newsletter, and we contract with Sanford Child to provide that education and that newsletter to providers. For parents, we make sure that all of our information is available to them. So if a parent has a concern, they can certainly call us and we will review if any inspections or enforcement action that we have taken with a provider, as well as all of that information is available on our website. So you can search on our website for daycare inspections and enforcement action, similar to how you would food service inspections. We do quick questions from parents, wanting referrals to daycare providers, which we stay a little bit away from that because we're really the entity that's there to uphold the ordinance and ensure safety. So we do refer quite a bit to the 211 center. They have a great child care guide as well as a service that matches available openings in daycare with families who need that care. So that is a broad overview of our program, and I'm happy to address any questions that you have.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Do
you
you have any
bet.
questions? Counselor Saleh?
Alicia, thank you. It seems in my past memory that there are certain numbers of daycare situations, or there's a number of people that might be, children that might be in there, that if it's like under 2 or something, they won't have to have, get registered. Am I
There
correct?
are certain situations. So for instance, someone caring for one child, we don't, that's more of, we see that as a babysitting or a nanny. We don't regulate someone caring for one child. So does that,
But otherwise, like if someone's got 3 kids come into their home,
yeah, with 3 different families, yes.
they have to be, or what if they're 3 kids from the same family?
I believe 3 kids from the same family would not need to be registered. That is
Okay, so if someone, let's say, back to the citation part, can we get the slide up on enforcement, please?
Yeah, you bet. Cool. Oh, I made it a pointer.
So I wanted to first of all ask about unsubstantiated complaints. What does that mean?
So a complaint, an unsubstantiated complaint is perhaps where we have had a complaint from someone in a neighborhood who believes that there's a daycare in place because they see a lot of children coming or going. But when we investigate that complaint, perhaps it's a grandmother with her grandchildren, things like that. That would be an unsubstantiated complaint because the complaint is that there's an unregistered daycare, but it's not in fact a daycare. So that's an example, but it can be almost anything someone could potentially complain of. If we do the inspection and don't find it to be, that complaint to be in play, as a fact, then that would be unsubstantiated.
Right, so what that means, though, is that someone could lodge a complaint with a daycare, just make something up, and then that would trigger an inspection.
It would, but it also triggers an opportunity for us to have a contact with that provider and provide education.
And then the citation suspension, what kind of, go into that a little bit about what that might look like.
Yeah. So, so as I mentioned, to give some context, 262 providers in 2018. I don't think it was actually 6 that received citations. There were 6 citations given in 2018, but I do believe 1 provider may have received 2 or 3, so it's not even 6 providers. But in 2018, we had situations of providers with too many children in care, so it would have been more than 12, or they would have been out of compliance with the ratios, so more infants than they could care for. And then there was another case that it was involved law enforcement. So those are the examples that I have for 2018. But typically a citation is going to be in the area of around too many children in care, because that is, oftentimes, if there's a complaint and we go into a home, then that is oftentimes a very obvious, high risk infraction of our ordinance. So I would say most often too many children in care.
And what is that a fine, or is it just like a ticket?
It aligns with the city citations. It's a $100 fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor Neitzer, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. How many children under the age of 1 can you have?
Oh yes, let me go to my ratios because I don't want to say it wrong. It's 12 children total, no more than 4 under the age of 2, and then of those, no more than 2 of those can be under the age of 1.
Okay. And then background checks?
Yep.
Is that a one-time or is it annual?
We do, so the felony background check goes back 5 years, and then our background checks are performed every 3 years, sort of on a rotating basis. Every 3 years, we renew and do a new batch so that everyone is getting a new background check every 3 years.
Is the fee a yearly fee?
Yes.
Okay. And then, when somebody applies to be a licensed in-home daycare provider, do you do a check to see if there's any registered sex offenders within a certain distance and then deny the permit, or is that not part of the?
We don't screen for registered sex offenders who live in the neighborhood. Is that what you're asking? Who
Yeah,
may live
yeah.
nearby?
Yeah.
That is not a screening I'm aware that we perform.
And would you know if there is an in-home daycare, would they be allowed to move within a certain proximity? Because I think there's rules about possibly daycares that they can't be within so far of a daycare. I mean, could one move in next door to an in-home daycare?
So the rules around where the sex offenders can live are within that sex offender. We don't regulate where they live. It's really for that sex offender to know the places that they can live. So I'm not aware that we are screening or doing any regulation around in-home daycares and their proximity to people who could potentially be on the sex offender list.
Okay, and last question. If there's a complaint and you go to inspect, I'm assuming to get the license, there must be some sort of a acknowledgement that you will submit to certain inspections to keep your license? So if somebody comes to the door and you need to inspect and they deny entry, can that be a reason for revocation or some sort of enforcement action?
Yes, the ordinance does require that, it says very clearly that daycare homes are open to announced or unannounced inspections. So one of the reasons we would give a citation is if we attempted to do an inspection and were not granted entry.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Councilor Day.
So, yeah, back to that sex offender analogy.
Yeah,
Because
good question.
you could have someone living in a home, sex offender, he's in the right place, and then somebody moves in next to him and decides to open a daycare, right? So that really wouldn't be fair to the person has this sex offender thing we wouldn't ever want to force him to have to move just because he right?
Well, what I know of the sex offender registry is it is open to the public, so the daycare provider would be able to review that before they moved into that neighborhood, which they would probably want to if they intend to watch children. But as far as our department, we do not at this time have a role in making recommendations for daycare providers relative to where they go.
But we would never want to set up something that, would force someone up. I mean, if he's done everything right, and then all of a sudden his environment changes around, or her, or whoever it would be, that would be an unfortunate thing, I think, for that person who's trying to do it right after they've gotten out of prison or whatever their term was. And one other thing, so no home daycare, no matter how large, how many staff members they have, they can never have more than 12 children?
No. They can have a different type of daycare facility. I think the state actually has a in-home daycare that allows more than 12, but we regulate in-home daycare 12 children or less because that is the section that is voluntary under the state program. So when you have a voluntary program, then we could have daycares within our city limits, some regulated and some unregulated. Our ordinance only meets that niche of the voluntary state-regulated programs. So up to 12 in a home is the extent of our city ordinance.
And one more thing, we've talked about this in the past, and I know Minnesota, Laverne, they've had things on the news about this horrible shortage of daycare providers. How are we doing in Sioux Falls with that?
I can give you a little bit of information on that. That is not just in Sioux Falls. We see that nationwide. I've pulled some information from us And the State Department of Health was also good to share information with me as well. So we have seen a decrease of in-home daycares in the city of Sioux Falls. So to give you an example, over the past 5 years, we went from 332 in-home daycares to 262, which I shared with you earlier. We've tried to keep a pulse on that with the state to find out if that's unique to our community. And what we found out is that they are reporting to us that they're seeing that statewide. So to share some of the information that the State Department of Health shared, from 2014 to 2018, statewide, there was a decrease of approximately 2,800 slots. That's not daycares, that's individual child slots. But on the other hand, we've gained nearly the same amount, approximately 2,500 in daycare facility slots. I think what we don't know is, are daycare providers choosing to open facilities and work in facilities rather than work at home, or are parents choosing facilities over in-home daycares? We don't have the level of detail to say what's driving that trend. We just know that we're seeing less in-home daycare and more daycare facilities.
Go ahead, Councilor Neitzer.
I did have one more question. Is there any sort of required literature, documentation that either has to be displayed or given to the parent by the provider? Like, for example, I could see it might not be a bad idea to say you have to give each parent a flyer. It might be a city printed flyer that says, these are the rules for these in-home daycares. You have an issue, you call this number, or something like that.
Right.
Is there anything like that
I'm not aware of
exist?
anything that they're giving. They do have to have their daycare registration prominently displayed. And there are also, in a section of our ordinance, there is quite a bit of detail around if there's any change in the home at all, whether it's the composition of the home, an action that may have been taken in that home, an investigation. It is required that the provider tell the parent. So there is at least some language requiring providers in that area, and that was strengthened in 2012.
And maybe finally, and I think you might have covered it, I don't know if it's just during the presence. So like a mother is running an in-home daycare. Her son, who's 22 years old, has been convicted of a felony and he's living in the basement.
That would not be allowed.
Okay, so do you background check?
He would be allowed to live in his mother's basement, but we would not be able to have a daycare in that home.
You background check everybody who lives in?
Yep, over the age of 15.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I had a couple questions.
I have one more.
Okay.
It would be interesting to see, because you're talking about the number of facilities and in-home options. Do you ever hear from the community that there's a need for more daycare? I mean, is that a resounding thing that people are having a hard time finding people to care for their children?
It's not uncommon that we hear of that from time to time. I did reach out to 211 Helpline to see what their trends are and to see what they're getting a feel for. They say that the most common request that they receive from parents is for infant care. That can be a barrier at times. So we certainly know that. I don't think it's an issue just in Sioux Falls, and what I was able to gather in some research that I did in this topic, up to 50% of U.S. families report a struggle with accessing daycare, sometimes, or quality in-home daycare or facility-based daycare, and it's often reasons for cost, sometimes it's quality, and sometimes it's access. That's different for every community, but that's not something that's unique for Sioux Falls.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else yet? So when somebody has, let's say, one too many kids or a couple too many kids, is it $100 per kid per over the limit, or?
No, that would be one citation.
Okay.
There might be other things, happening. Every case is different. We've had, we wrestle with probably a half a dozen daycare cases a year, and I can assure you that each one of them are different, but one incidence of being over numbers would be one citation.
Okay. Do you run into that one very often? I guess maybe that'll tie into my second question. I mean, as far as Do you have annual stats like on this, like here's incidents, we have one with too many kids and one where maybe there was an unhealthy environment? I mean, do you do this annually and here's what we had?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have access to that information. I don't believe I brought that level of detail for you today, but as a comparison, we issued 6 citations in 2018 and 2 in 2017. So, and it's generally for, I would say most of the time, similar things: over numbers, over ratios, lack of a master list, someone in the home that has not been through the process of being screened. You know, that could potentially even be a suspension until that person is screened, because, you know, we have someone with access to children that hasn't had a background checked. So I would say those are the more common ones.
Okay, interesting. All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, next for presentations, Parks Operations Manager Kelby Maris will be up to give us an Emerald Ash Borer update. Welcome, Kelby.
Thank you. Good afternoon, City Council. Kelby Maris with Parks and Recreation. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to come to you today, give an update on our Emerald Ash Borer response plan. Felt like this was a good time to do that because we have just entered the window in which our city ordinance says that we cannot move ash wood. So ash trees we're in that moratorium, so ash trees are not coming down at this point. So first, I'd like to start with some thank yous. The Parks Operations team has done an outstanding job of attacking these trees, both in the right-of-way and in the park system. The forestry crew has, of course, shouldered most of the load in doing that, especially in the right-of-way. And for people that continue to assist in this endeavor, that seem to touch our response plan every day, are Dwayne Stahl, Brian Peterson, Jackie Nelson, and Sandy Frentz, who actually make this process quite enjoyable. So, an update on our response. We did find a satellite infestation in the area of 39th and Minnesota. It was actually trees that we had marked for removal. 2 of them came down, and when they came down, the contractor noticed the galleries and some of the branching and contacted Dwayne and Brian, and they went out to investigate and then sent the information on up the chain through the state and into the federal government. It appears, though, that these are the only 2 trees in this area in which the infestation was found. The delimiting survey was completed by Dr. Ball, and he did not find the evidence of emerald ash borer in any other of the ash trees around this area. That could be simply that the infestation is so young that the other trees aren't showing any signs, or we could have just gotten really lucky. So the infestation seems to be very new and very young. We will also, of course, continue to monitor around this location, around the city, and around the original infested area with traps through the state this year, and doing other visual inspections when somebody calls with a tree that they think may have the emerald ash borer. Of course, between us and Dr. Ball, we will be investigating those concerns. This year in 2019, we are issuing blue tags to licensed arborists to tag the treated trees. In 2018, we issued silver tags. This is in a process for us to be able to know, 1, how many trees are being treated in our community, and 2, so that when we go to remove trees, we're not removing trees that somebody has paid to treat, whether they're in the right-of-way or on private property. So some things that we've learned to this point. Removing 1/3 of the trees in the removal area seems to be the right approach, and is the approach that we're going to continue with moving forward. One of the things, though, that we've learned in visiting with homeowners as we're removing these trees is that we need to maybe look for some locations in which we are taking both of the ash trees at a property instead of taking one and maybe taking one across the street. In this picture on this slide, we took one of these 2 ash trees. So the problem with the homeowner with this is that We left them one tree, but we didn't leave them a spot to plant a new one. Had we taken both trees, then they would have had the opportunity to plant a new tree. We're also learning, of course, we knew that these trees were big, but these trees are taking a significant amount of time to remove, not only for our crews, but for the contractors as well. The treatments that I mentioned a little bit earlier in 2018, about 10% of all of the ash trees in Sioux Falls were treated, and that's very encouraging. Of course, we'd like to see that number a little higher to help to slow the spread of the infestation, but that's definitely an encouraging number and one that Dr. Ball has applauded the city for. And our planting permit that was put into ordinance last year is working. So our street tree removal plan, the street tree inventory began June 3rd, and Davie Resource Group has inventoried more than 2,500 trees at this point, and they plan to be completed with the inventory around Labor Day, which actually is perfect timing for us so that the inventory can be done and we can begin our removals again. We marked 2,125 trees for removal. Of course, they were large in size, from 8 inches to 67 inches in diameter, but the average was 25 inches and was much larger than what we had expected when we started. Letters and other communications were sent to the property owners whose trees that were marked with the blue 9 for the 2019 removal to verify treatment status. If you remember, we targeted 2,200 trees instead of the 2,125. But 75 of those trees came off after the tree was marked, and the communications went to the property owners. They contacted us that either the tree had been treated or was going to be treated, so we removed it from our removal list, taking us down to that 2,125. So how are we doing? Well, to this point, we have removed 802 of the 2,100 ash trees in the right-of-way, or about 37% of the trees that we marked for removal. There's a couple of things that are pointing to why we're at 37% instead of 50%. One is definitely the weather. I think everybody remembers what the first 5 months of the year were like. Really cold, full of snow in February, and then the flood in March. So the conditions to do this type of work were not great. So we're not quite to that 50%, but hopefully we'll get better weather in the fall and can make up that difference. Our stump removal in the right-of-way has begun. As of yesterday, we had removed 78 stumps of the 802 that are out there. And we've also got 34 additional trees from that 2,125 that have been treated by the abutting property owner. So the way that we're tracking our progress, the picture on the left side of this slide is our removal area for 2019. And on the right is a dashboard that GIS put together for our EAB response. So the orange dots on the map are trees that are yet to come down. The green dots are trees that have been removed. The black dots are trees that have been treated. And the red dots are stumps that have been removed. So essentially, the tree is a dot on the map and it changes color as it moves through the process. So moving forward into 2020, we will be targeting 2,300 trees of an estimated 6,000 in the area that you see on the map here, which is essentially directly west of our 2019 removal area. We will be marking these trees with a blue 0 to keep them different from the 2019 trees with the blue 9. The reason why we're targeting that 2,300 instead of 2,200 is because we fully expect that through the communications with the property owners, again, we'll get some people that say, I'm going to treat my tree, remove it off of the list, but we still want to try to maintain as best we can that 10% removal per year to maintain the 10-year response plan. I'd mentioned that the inventory, they plan to be done with the inventory by Labor Day, and that's great news and great timing. We will be able to use that information from the inventory to drive the selection of the trees to be removed in 2020, using their size, location, and condition as criteria to select those removals. And then we can mark these trees for removal in August. That would allow our team enough time throughout the rest of the year to continue to remove the 2019 trees. Last year we marked in October, but keeping the saws moving will be good in helping us to reach our goals for the 2019 removals. Our public tree removal plan, we removed trees from 33 different parks and from Elmwood Golf Course. We eliminated the ash tree from 24 parks that had 10 ash trees or less. We removed 562 total ash trees in the city parks and the golf course, which is 140% of what we targeted for removal. And the reason why we overachieved was because we hadn't targeted those trees, the 90+ trees that we took down at Elmwood Golf Course. So that was kind of a bonus. And one of the great things about the removal of those trees on the golf course is you can see the picture on the far right is the new grapple saw. Removing those trees on the golf course created a perfect opportunity for us to train and get familiar with this piece of equipment in a location that was safe, where there were no other people, of course. In the winter months, the golf course was closed, and so it gave us a perfect opportunity to do that. And actually, the grapple saw here is in operation at Yankton Trail Park, removing a tree that had a utility conflict so that we could restore power to the park following the flood. It just shows the versatility of that piece of equipment and exactly why we bought it, because trying to do that removal with a high ranger and other equipment and trying to keep the tree out of the river would have been a challenge. We've also removed 528 stumps throughout the city parks, and our 2020 removal plan calls for the removal of about 220 trees in 19 parks. The parks are listed there in the middle, and of course the top 8 are parks that you saw last year, and that's because those parks, when we started the response plan, had 95 or more ash trees in them, and we will be in those parks likely every year of the response plan removing trees. So, planting plan. We identified about 700 different sites that would be acceptable locations in following the city ordinance and the street tree guide when we were out marking trees for removal. The street tree permitting process is available online, and currently we've had 26 requests for street trees for planting permits, and 22 of those have been issued. 4 of them have been denied because they were poor locations, and without that planting permit, those 4 trees would have gone into poor locations and likely caused troubles in the future, so highlighting the value of that planting permit. And as you can see with the information on the right is a screenshot from our website. You can apply for a street tree permit either online, you can fill out a permit online and email it to us, you can do it through CSS, or you can come to the city center and fill out a hard copy, or you can print off a hard copy and send it to us. So there's various ways for people to fill out an application for a street tree permit. Also throughout this permitting process, we do notify, throughout the process, notify the property owners that they are responsible for the care and maintenance of those trees once they're planted. And we have also planted 126 trees in the park system this year. So our planting plan for 2020, the goal is to plant 500 trees in parks and public spaces. We have opened up spaces through our removals in 2018 and 2019, and hopefully in the first part of 2020 we will as well. And we anticipate approximately 375 street trees that could go back in as part of a cost share program utilizing the relief funds from the relief project. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilor Neitzer.
4 were denied because of a poor location. What would qualify as a poor location? Power lines or something else? Or?
Could be power lines, could be too close to a street light, too close to a fire hydrant, too close to another tree, too close to a driveway. There's 12 different criteria listed in our ordinance, and it needs to meet all 12 of those. The boulevard could be too narrow as well. So just looking to make sure that the tree has got ample room to grow and spread and not come into conflict with other things in the right of way.
And in some cases, I'm guessing somebody could adjust or apply again and maybe move it over and it might qualify?
Well, we do a site inspection, and look at the space to see if it qualifies, and if it needs to be moved 5 or 10 feet, I mean, we'll do that there and then issue the permit. But likely these locations they're just other trees are too close. Maybe neighbor's got a large maple tree and it's just not gonna be a spot where 40 feet from that tree is the middle of their driveway. So the location just isn't something that would support a tree.
Okay, thank you.
Else? Councilor Staley?
Did you say you're doing a site inspection with every permit?
Yes.
So the staff's actually coming out? Okay. And how much does that cost?
Permit is free.
Permit's free. Second thing, Kelby, is that just for the public's benefit, I was told the scenario that if an ash tree falls down on your property, you cannot, like between Memorial Day and Labor Day, you can't even touch it. Is that correct? I mean, it falls in your front yard, your own tree, falls down, you can't move it.
No, that's not accurate. The ordinance doesn't talk about the cutting of ash trees between Memorial Day and Labor Day. It's the transportation of that waste wood. We, of course, know that there are going to be situations in which that wood would need to be transported if there's storm damage. So if a tree blows over, yes, absolutely, cut it up, transport it to a disposal site. That's acceptable. Line clearance has not stopped. So the line clearance companies are out there and they're still trimming trees. Some of them may be ash trees and they're transporting that wood as well. So as long as the transportation is because of public safety, then we'll allow that transportation. But if you just want to pick July to cut your ash tree down, well, you can cut it down, which is going to stay on your property.
How are you going to verify if it was a wind-driven thing or just a decision on the homeowner?
Well, we've got a pretty good pulse on storm damage because when a storm comes through and there's damage to trees, street trees are typically first, and we're usually one of the first people they call.
And then lastly, 34 so you're saying only 34 homeowners there's only been 34 trees that have been treated?
Now, of the 2,125 trees that were on our removal list, 34 of those trees have been treated by abutting property owners.
That's what I'm saying, because people have that option.
Right.
So 34 people have, I'm surprised, that seems like a low number to me.
We're getting a lot of people asking us to take even more trees than the ones that have been marked for removal.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My question is a little bit outside of Sioux Falls. Oftentimes, some of the smaller communities don't have the knowledge or resources that maybe some of the folks in our departments that do. So talk to me a little bit about any potential outreach to some of the smaller communities in helping them either draft an ordinance such as the ones we have, or I just know that there's been a few smaller communities that have reached out and you guys have been extremely helpful. And so just maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure, absolutely. We did provide a presentation to the Arborist Association earlier this year. The conference was here in Sioux Falls. And following that conference, following that presentation, I was asked to provide information to some other communities. I not only sent them the presentation that they'd asked for, but our draft language for the ordinances that we put into effect, and of course gave them contact information for us, and happy to help. Was also this fall we're going to do a PBS thing with Dr. Ball and with the State Game Fish and Parks to talk all things EAB, not only in Sioux Falls but across the state. Did a radio piece with public broadcasting earlier this year as well. Essentially that same thing. It's kind of what we're doing it's however it works in your town, but this is what we're doing, and if anybody's got questions, or feel free to ask. We're happy to help.
Good. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Last but not least, Mr. Bixler, our City Council Budget Analyst. Give us an update on the 2020 City Council budget. Welcome.
Thank you. David Bixler, Budget Analyst for the City Council. In May, mid-May, I had requested that the councilors provide input to me for the council budget, and specifically I was asking for the number of attendees planning to go to the NLC conference in November, which we have done every year. Also, there's the NLC event that occurs in March, and wanted to know if the council was considering to go to that and how many were traveling. Also, were there any other events that the councilors are planning to attend that I should include in the budget? And if there were any other additional equipment needs by the council. I also requested the downstairs office area get a new printer and scanner upgraded, just for the fact that I think it's going to be a bottleneck in the future with the staff down there. And again, that would not be in the baseline, and I estimate that to be an impact of about $4,500 annually to the council budget. The guidance I'm requesting is that the items requested to be budgeted above the baseline need consensus of the council as a body. And so I look at this as two different ways. One, do I, as a budget analyst, add each item above the baseline to the budget, and if councilors want it removed, they do so by amendment and vote. And in this scenario, all budgeted items would be disclosed. Or does the budget analyst budget the baseline, and if councilors want additional items added to the budget, they add by amendment and vote? Here is the baseline that that's currently budgeted. So the National Citizen Survey, we had 5,000 in 2019. We will have 20,000 in 2020. It just rotates year to year. Legal services, we have $12,000 in that. That would be maintained as part of the budget baseline. We have the Municipal League dues. We have the National League dues. And we also have the National League of Cities that we go to the National City Summit in November. There we have budgeted 3 counselors and 1 staff. And it's for the registration, airfare, hotel, food, and shuttle service. But I do want to note that although it was not budgeted, the council has sent 4 counselors and 1 staff to the annual conference in 2018 and plan to send 5 in 2019. There's also a variety of things that I have listed that I budget for the council through food, water, business cards, a variety of things. So again, I'm looking to find out if I should add each item above the baseline to the budget, and if the councilors want it removed, they do so by amendment and vote. Or just budget the baseline, and if councilors want additional items added to the budget, they would be amended and voted on. And that would take place at the second reading in September when the budget would be adopted.
Take questions? All right. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I know you put a lot of work in making sure that our budget is conservative, yet meets the needs of what you all need as staff. And so for that, I'm appreciative. And I know you do reach out to us and ask us just for guidance along the way as well, and I think that's important. One of the questions that you had asked was in regards to the guidance, and so for me personally, I appreciate the budget baseline. I think the cleanest version would be to do the budget baseline, and then if there are any additional items, I think that it's each counselor's responsibility to create draft with staff and create an amendment, just like we do with the regular budget. That way, each amendment will be heard separately, each item will be brought and voted on, versus kind of taking things out here and there. So for me personally, that's the way I'd like to see us go. Obviously, welcome any other feedback from anyone else, but just wanted to express that since you're asking. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Brecky.
So am I to understand is there was David asked for input, and I gave him some input, and I told him these are ideas. Is this the time to discuss those ideas? To just throw them out to the rest of the council? That I have 3 things that I suggested. I'm just unclear as to what the procedure is.
Anybody have any input on that particular procedure, or
I've got a question.
Counselor Staley?
We don't have a reserve, correct?
Correct.
And yet we do have extra money. For example, we made a decision last summer, about this time, to add another person to go to the National League of Cities. How much does it cost per person to go into that? 2,000?
A little bit more than that, about 2,500.
So we added another person that wasn't budgeted for. Where did that money come from? If we don't have a reserve.
We do not have a reserve. Overall, for the council's budget that has the 3 departments within it, is audit, the city council, and the city clerks. And in cases where, such as with the audit department, we didn't have labor and benefits for the entire year. Positions weren't filled, and they were budgeted for, so we had some dollars for those. And so some of those ideas are, the thoughts are that we manage the budget. We're not putting in extra dollars, but we're managing the costs and the expenses we have as they occur.
So this isn't the same as like the budget we deal with the mayor, because in that instance, when it's all presented, to make an amendment, you've got to be able to take money from one other department and put it into the project you may want to be funding. So this is our own budget. I know you did ask us for guidance. I gave you some things as well. We have the, how much is it for the city attorney, or for the attorney?
12,000.
12,000, and I like having that in there, although it's never been used. But the caveat with that, my understanding is before we would be able to utilize that 12,000 that has been in the budget for what? How many years, do you think? Since
7 at least.
before that would be, I can't just go there and say, well, I'd like to have 3,000 to, for this and that with an attorney's advice. We have to have a consensus somehow in the group, right, to utilize that money.
Yes.
So there's something I put in, I haven't quite formalized it yet to present it to you, but I did request something. And so that's why I was hoping we could have this discussion a little later, once I've talked with the mayor and kind of gotten some direction on what I would like to I'm looking at like maybe $1,200 for a project. But I think it'd be neat if we did have a reserve amount of money that down the road during the year, if something came up, we could have a discussion and maybe utilize that money if we needed to. I would hate to see us get in such a bind that there's no wiggle room. And if we don't have a reserve, I don't know how if everything, because to me, I thought a budget you can't be kind of fuzzy over here and then fuzzy here and then we'll make this work. It's got to all be accounted for.
The budget needs to be realistic. It needs to have the expectation of what is intended to be spent. But things do occur throughout the year that you need to adjust for, just as with the city in total, with the sales tax decline, you had to adjust. The city had to adjust.
But there was a reserve to call upon.
Yes.
And we don't have that with the city council.
You have the ability to supplement the budget if you chose to. But would it make sense to supplement the budget, to send somebody, an additional person, to the National League of Cities and supplement the budget for $2,500 when you have funds from a position that you didn't fill? Why wouldn't you just use that?
Oh, no, that would happen last year, but that might not be the case moving forward.
Correct. But you manage the budget.
So if you don't spend, can you take the money out of the 12,000 for the attorney? Do you do that sometimes? We have 12,000 for is that a fluid fund?
We have not done that. But I look at it as the budget in total, not as each line item. When we do an expense, we definitely keep the consistency with our expenses. We're not going to put an expense for travel in a labor and benefit line. We are going to keep it in a travel line.
But labor and benefit would have been for that staff person.
their labor and benefits portion.
And we
would
we
remain
used the
in-
travel for that. We did use it.
The labor and benefits portion would remain in the labor and benefits categorization within the budget, but the travel for that person will fall in the travel line item. We are not going to put it in to a different category. We are going to keep our budget consistent, so it's easy to track over years.
I understand, but you said last year we didn't fill a position, so we had money to pay for that extra person to go to the convention. You said that earlier.
Correct.
So we did use that. So the same thing, the money would be used for the attorney. It's a person that we may or may not use, so that we could draw out of that if we did want to send, someone else to some other convention. There's wiggle room, is what I'm saying.
Yes, you could, but the expense would fall in where it should fall.
We have other questions? Councilor Kiley?
The difference between having an open staff position, that's a given, you know that in advance, versus using the attorney fees. You don't know when you're going to need to use the attorney fees. So it would not be prudent to dip into the attorney fees before the end of your budget year, because you don't know. You might need those attorney fees on the last day of the budget year. So it'd be difficult to borrow from that segment, that line item of the budget for that reason, because you don't know when it's going to be needed, if it's not going to be needed until the year end. I do get what Councilor Staley is stating in terms of reserve, but this body does have the power to do a supplemental budget to our budget if needed. I would just say with the suggestion, one comment and thought that I have with the suggestion of adding a March meeting, I guess I would not be opposed to that, providing that it did not exceed 5 for the year, 5 trips for the year. I don't want to get in a position where we're spending money on 10 trips in one calendar year. I think it sends the wrong message to the public in terms of how we're using their money. I know that there's benefit from coming out of these, but I don't think we need to double our personal travel as counselors. I would not, even if that were done, I would not partake in that personally. Just my thoughts on that item.
Anybody else?
I'd like to make just a couple of notes. In the past, we have had instances where we had an auditor had the opportunity to go to New York City for some training, and it was not in our budget, but we were able to manage our budget that person was able to go. Likewise, a few years back, we had one of our counselors go to Washington, D.C. to lobby for the F-15s, I believe. That was not in our budget. But again, as we managed our budget, we were able to absorb that expense, not look for a supplement, and maintain our budget.
Councilor Brecky.
Just clarification for me. So for this year, we've managed our budget in such a way that we've already prepaid for 4 people to go to the National League of Cities next fall, correct?
5 people.
We have it budgeted. We haven't paid.
Right, but
we have it.
yeah. So what you're asking us is for input, because if we do the baseline, that's the 3+1, and you're asking for some feedback. As I'm taking that, do you want to bump that up permanently? And I would like to offer feedback that yes, and I've been clear on this, but yes, I think it would be wise to do that because there is, I think, a very legitimate interest in the council's very interested in going. And so I would, that would be my proposal or my suggestion for the 2020 budget that we do the 4+1. Is that, am I stating that correctly? That's
Yes.
what because that's what we're
Yes.
planning on doing, but we're making budget adjustments to do it. So for the future, so I just would, again, toss that out there for discussion purposes. And then I raised the issue when I gave you guys my presentation on national, the Congress of Cities and how valuable I found that in a whole different way. And I was suggesting at that time and would still suggest that we, budget for 3 people to go to that. And I would take my my name out of that hat, because I just had, the benefit of going and experiencing that, and I would, love to have some of my fellow council members have that experience as well. I think I would be down on the rotation anyway, but if that's an issue, I would, since I'm proposing it, I don't want to, appear as I'm proposing it, so that I can benefit, but I just think it was extremely valuable, and I would like to have enough council members go to see if they agree, So that would be something I would propose that we put in the 2020 budget as well.
Before we go back, did you have something, Councilor Neitzer? I thought you were waving too.
Yes, okay, so really the issue is we're trying to give you some guidance so you can move to the next step, and I think at this point, I'm not sure whether you're there yet. The question is, do you put the things in that people have requested, whatever they are, into the baseline budget? Because you have to turn something in a couple of weeks, or do you stick with the baseline? To me, absent a clear consensus of the body, you don't put anything in that isn't in the baseline. You submit the baseline. It's up to the proponent of whatever new things to get it amended. That would be my position. I would just give an example. It's a ridiculous example, but let's say that I had said put in $15,000 for donuts for the year so that staff could have donuts every day, and I submit it to you by email. I should have to build consensus to get whatever it is in. So my proposal would be you go with the baseline, and then we have to amend in whatever we need to amend in, or we need some sort of formal action of the body to say, we want to do this. Because I think as of right now, I'm hearing a little of this, a little of that, and I'm afraid he's going to walk away in a couple minutes, and he's going to be right where he was before, which is, what do I do? And he's in the position where he's staff, and he's looking for our direction. And so I'm trying to give him that. That would be, and I don't want to, I'm not even going to talk about individual items. The merits of those, I don't even know what's even all submitted. So it's just, that is the question. And I think, absent us giving you an actual direction of the body, I don't know how you couldn't do anything but submit the baseline. So.
Well, I'm guessing Councilor Sale would go along with the donut thing, but anyway, Councilor Staley?
Well, and I'm going to come back to the issue of flexibility. Case in hand, last week, or a few weeks ago, I asked if the council would be willing to fund this Festival of Cultures booth. $30. We didn't budget for that. So that there had to be some extra cash laying around for that. Another thing, we have the Municipal League in the fall, the conference. Sometimes people go, sometimes people don't go. Are you budgeting for all 8 of us to go to that?
I budget for 10, because you also have staff.
Okay.
Well.
Our staff that goes. So that's, and how much do you budget for how much was that from last year?
I don't have the figure off the top of my head. Registration's usually $25 per person. Hotel maybe $75, $100 per person. And
For a
meals.
few nights. So it could be 10,000 maybe?
I don't think it's that high. That's, no.
Okay, but that's something that I've never utilized myself, but that's an expense. And then we have the day at the legislature where we go, some of us go. One year, nobody ended up going. Some years, we got 4 or 5 people going. So you budget for that as well. So there are some fluid expenses. There's some movement. I like having that extra availability so that we don't have to feel like everything is locked in right now. And then we could bring it up, during the year, if something would come up, we could talk about it, as we did last year.
Some of the requests that have come through, I don't see why, as the year progresses, that it doesn't just come forward and you address with whoever would be your counterparts. And in most cases, I think that the budget could absorb that as we manage through it year to year.
But I guess I would like to know, in the past, this is my 3rd year on the council, I don't ever remember a year where we've had a situation where, like what we do formally with the budget in the fall, where we are, I don't ever remember anybody adding an amendment to our budget at the end when we approve it. I don't think that's ever happened. It's a little different thing. So it'd be kind of, alert me to when that happens, and then we can talk about anything I may have in mind and Did I hear, are we allowing, what did we decide with the Counselor Brecky thing in the spring? Or is that not?
I'm still confused. I'm still wondering if, I thought maybe that was the purpose of this meeting, you know,
Right
to
now,
actually
where
toss
I-
those
where I
things
think
around
where
and
I'm
try to
at-
give some direction. So I'm just confused. I don't know what we're doing.
I believe that
If I could maybe,
I didn't know if you
Mr.
was
Chair?
answering a question yet. Go ahead, Counselor Kiley.
two things. I think instead of designating National League of Cities November, let's just, my thought would be a budget for 5 trips to National League of City events. And if the individuals that are eligible that year wish to attend to a November event, they can attend that. If they would prefer to attend the March event, then they could attend that one, but it would not exceed the allotted 5 that was budgeted for. And the other thing is that this body could consider is add a miscellaneous category to our budget that would serve as a reserve, and you could designate $5,000 or whatever to be able to cover things like a $30 booth or a trip to advocate for whatever might come up. That does give you some of that flexibility. I don't know if it's been done in our city budgets. I know that I have included that in the budget that I work with, because there's always things that come along that just do not fit in any one of the line items. Of course, it has to be authorized beforehand, before we spend it, but the money is there, which allows you that flexibility.
I would respectfully disagree with that thought of having some kind of a built-in reserve. If you look over the history of the council's budget, we have come in very close year to year, where the bogey is between 5% above or beyond what the budget is, and so far we've maintained that. And I don't think that just to start adding more dollars into the budget, to me, as the council's budget analyst, I don't think that that's a wise move. I think that, as has been done in the past, demonstrated in the past, is that the council with staff manages the budget and is able to do these other items that come up, and we're able to absorb that into our budget. So I don't think we just want to start adding additional dollars.
Counselor Sale?
Here would be my suggestion, if we could just get to Mr. Bixler the things that we think are important, if it's travel to someplace or if it's donuts, have him list all the requests that we have and say, now you guys have to choose. You have to choose your battles. That if somebody says, yes, I want that we have to go to the National League of Cities and we have to do it at this point, put in a little explanation, as this is what I believe. Make us stand up and say, these are our priorities. You're looking for some direction. We can give you specific direction on specific items if you list them to us. Here would be the travel here. Here would be the travel here. Here would be the attorney's fees. At some point in time, we can change the budget if we do it publicly, if we do it by a vote. We can just say, well, we're going to take some of the money we had allocated for travel because, by golly, we need to get our attorney in here. That's the most important thing that we need to do today. So let's just do that. Let's everybody get to him things that we want, give a little explanation. You can list them. We can publicly talk about specific items, and we'll vote, and away we go.
Can I speak up? Or are we still going around? Remind me last year with the travel thing, when we added one, did we go about that with this baseline budget we're talking about? We went with that, and then to add this, we went through the steps to vote on it, and...
The addition last year was made by motion.
Okay.
It was not added to the budget. We didn't supplement the budget. Same as this year, we're not adding to the budget. We're not supplementing it. We're able to manage to it. And as we get closer to the end of the year, we will be watching. I watch that very closely. And if there's concern, I will certainly bring it up to the council's attention, as well as I also work with finance. So.
And I'm asking the question because if there's a motion with good merit and it's important, you're kind of leading us to believe, and we've seen this, that there's a way to find the funds through this way or another. So is there a reason why we throw a wrench in the system, how it's worked the last few years. One, generally, if there's been a good argument for something, it's been brought forward, we found the funds. Did I put that?
Yep, that is a very fair assessment. That if there are initiatives that come up and the body agrees that it should go forward, I believe that we will be able to find the funds to make that happen.
Okay. Councilor Neitzer.
I would submit my input. We don't need a miscellaneous category. We don't need to supplement our budget. I'm not sure council ever does that. There's always money left in the budget, just from cost savings or.
Prior to, in the first year I was here, I believe that there were supplements to the budget for election expenses.
Sure. Okay, fair enough.
There has not been.
Point still holds. I'm pretty sure that we don't run our budget so close we can't afford $40 in the middle of the year for something. So, and if something was that important, we could always supplement if it's that huge of an emergency. So I think we're managing is fine. So I think we have a couple of choices. Councilor Sale made one good suggestion. Was there some way in which we just go down the list and we talk about it? And now how you would do that, I mean, at a working session, the best you can do, I saw one year they did thumbs up, thumbs down, and they counted them because you can't make motions. Or you do a resolution where you list them all and then we amend it and we all vote on it. I mean, we have a time constraint here, but you could do that. I'm not sure how we would do it any other way because I don't know if you would send an email out. I don't know how we're, because then that's like a voting by email thing and then we just get into a pickle with that. So it almost seems like it has to be public. So it seems like we either have to go through each of the items or we have to decide we're not going to put them in, and then we'll deal with them as the year progresses, which I don't know if I like that a whole lot, because some of these could be several $1,000s for trips and things like that. Or the submission I would make is, again, you could submit the baseline. And the reason I would say submit the baseline is because if you submit the baseline, then it's on the person that wants to add something new to be the proponent and make the motion. If you just put it in because one person says so right now, it's in the budget, and then they don't have to do anything on the night of the budget. The people that are against it then have to make motions to take it out. You're putting the onus on the people that it shouldn't be. If you want something, you need to build the consensus and get it passed. You shouldn't just get it in and then have to take it out. So I don't know if you have any way in which, based on your deadline, if there's time that we could meet, potentially, and just go down the list, tick, 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 if people are willing to make their items public. So,
Councilor Braggie.
I was going to say, chime in that I do like Kurt's idea. That's kind of what I thought today was going to be. I just assumed that we would have a day like this, because if it's going to be our baseline, some of these things need to be introduced so they become the new baseline. Because if they're a reoccurring thing, if our new baseline, for example, is going to be 4, then that needs to become the baseline so that the budget is real. We don't just lump all these things on the idea that, okay, we think we're going to manage the budget in such a way that they become in, because then our baseline isn't really a baseline, if that makes any sense. So I think it could be done fairly quickly. We'd have some discussion and then just, kind of similar to the session that we did when we did our budget kind of prioritizing for the large budget, for the city budget, just, in a similar fashion with Dave's leadership, just kind of guiding us through them, having discussion. And then if we have to do something formally, after we've kind of resolved it informally to do it, and as long as we do it in public, I think we can do that just fine, so.
One more thing I would say is, I'm reiterating because I think I just said this, but it seems to me that the budget has been managed effectively for the council for a while. But it's been through a system where if there's something somebody wants or needs, you build the consensus for it, you come to us and Councilor Brecky last year came to us with the idea of adding somebody for the trip, worked through that, voted yea or nay, there went the money and somebody went. So anyway, system-wise, I don't know what's really broken, but again, that's why we're here talking. Maybe there are ways to do it better, but that's what I have. Anybody else?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
And if we do get together, what I'd like to have in front of us is the cost, like salaries of the employees, I'd like to comb through the whole budget. It is our budget, and that we would have it in a list of, a printout. Let's go through it so we're educated publicly about what we're spending everything on. Just kind of bullet point it. You got categories here, but there's nothing, I'd like a monetary, like I asked you about what we're spending, what we spent on the fall conference, you said you didn't have that there. Just what we've budgeted for all those things. I think that would be very beneficial and real transparent to the public.
Certainly provide that.
All right, good talk. Thank you.
What do we do?
Next, we have, if anybody has any public comment on any of today's issues. All right, seeing none, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
I'm gonna go.